Welcome to Her True Stories, where we share powerful tales of women who refuse to be silenced. Today's story of sweet revenge will have you cheering. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our new uploads. Now, let's dive into Michaela's incredible journey. The cardboard box felt heavier than it should have as I carried it down the familiar stairs of the home I'd lived in for the past 30 years. Each step creaked its familiar greeting, a sound that had once brought comfort, but now echoed with betrayal. My weathered hands clutched the sides of the box, knuckles white, fingernails digging into the worn cardboard as I tried to hold back tears that threatened to fall. Don't forget your gardening books, Michaela. We need to clear the shelves for Mom's crystal collection. Derek's voice floated up from the foyer, each word a hammer driving me further from the place I'd called home for decades. My son-in-law stood at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed over his chest, watching me with the detached interest of someone supervising a moving crew. Except I wasn't hired help. I was family, or at least I thought I was. At 65, I never imagined I'd be packing up my life, while my daughter Caroline stood silently by, neither defending me nor meeting my eyes. The beautiful craftsman home that my late husband Robert and I had purchased as newlyweds, the home where we'd raised our only daughter, the home I'd maintained through widowhood and loneliness, was no longer mine. Not in their eyes, anyway. "I know where my books are," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt.
Dignity.
That's what I had left. I've been putting them on those shelves for 30 years. Derek's mouth tightened at the corners. He'd never been good at hiding his impatience, even when he was trying to be diplomatic. Just trying to be helpful. "The movers need to be out by 5, and Sandra and Bill will be here tonight." Sandra and Bill. His parents. The people who would now be sleeping in my bedroom, cooking in my kitchen, tending to my garden. The garden where Robert's ashes were scattered beneath the magnolia tree he'd planted the day we moved in. I continued down the stairs, careful not to look at the family photos lining the wall, the ones Derek had already mentioned updating. Caroline still hadn't spoken. She stood near the door, smartphone in hand, scrolling as if the dismantling of her mother's life was just another Tuesday afternoon. "Caroline," I said softly as I reached the bottom step, "could you help me with the photo albums? They're heavy, and I want to make sure they don't get damaged." She looked up, startled, as if she'd forgotten I was there.
Oh, Zora?
She slipped her phone into her back pocket. "Where are they again?" "In the hall closet, where they've always been." A flicker of something, guilt perhaps, crossed her face before she nodded and headed toward the closet. Derek checked his watch. "The apartment is all set up," he said, his tone suggesting I should be grateful. "It's only 10 minutes away, and the complex has a nice little community garden plot you can use. Much easier to manage than this yard." The apartment. A one-bedroom senior living unit that Derek and Caroline had secured for me without consultation. A nice place, they'd assured me, with people your own age. As if I hadn't been perfectly capable of maintaining my home and garden, as if I suddenly needed to be among my own kind, tucked away where I wouldn't inconvenience their plans. "Very thoughtful," I murmured, setting the box down on the entryway table. Through the front window, I could see the moving truck and a few men loading my furniture, pieces Robert and I had chosen together, each with its own story, now reduced to items that needed to be somewhere else. I hadn't wanted to sell the house. The mortgage had been paid off years ago, and I managed the property taxes and maintenance just fine on my teacher's pension and Robert's life insurance. But when Caroline and Derek's third investment property fell through last month, they'd presented me with a solution that benefited everyone, or so they claimed. "Mom, it just makes sense," Caroline had explained over dinner 3 weeks ago. "This house is too big for one person. You're always complaining about the stairs, and the yard is so much work." I hadn't been complaining. I'd simply mentioned my knee was acting up after a particularly vigorous day of gardening. We can buy the house from you, Derek had continued, sliding a folder across the table. Fair market value. You'll have a nice nest egg, and we'll handle the renovation costs. Renovation? I'd asked, confused. The house was in excellent condition. Just updates, Caroline had said quickly. Modernizing the kitchen, opening up the floor plan. Things that will increase the value when we eventually sell or rent it. It hadn't made sense to me then. Why would they buy my house to sell it? But Derek had already moved on, talking about how his parents were looking to downsize as well, and wouldn't it be perfect if they moved in temporarily? They'd help with the renovations, of course. Only later did I learn that temporarily meant indefinitely, and renovations meant erasing every trace of the home Robert and I had built. By then, papers had been signed. The money, less than I'd later discover was fair market value, had been deposited into my account, and plans were in motion. Mom? I found the albums. Caroline's voice pulled me back to the present. She stood holding a stack of photo albums, her expression uncertain. Should I put them in the truck or keep them separate? Separate, I said. I'll take them in my car. She nodded and set them carefully next to my box. For a moment, we stood there, mother and daughter, surrounded by the dismantling of shared history. I wanted to ask her why. Why she'd let Derek push this plan. Why she seemed so unbothered by uprooting me from my home. Why she couldn't see how much this hurt. Instead, I asked, what time is the housewarming party tomorrow? Derek answered before Caroline could. 4:00. But Mom, you don't need to come. We understand if it's too soon. Too soon. As if I was grieving a natural departure rather than being evicted by my own family. I'll be there, I said, picking up my box again. After all, I should welcome Sandra and Bill to the neighborhood. I've lived here longer than anyone on the block. Derek and Caroline exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Concern? Annoyance? It didn't matter. I would be at that housewarming party, but not for the reasons they thought. I stepped past them and out into the May sunshine, inhaling the scent of the roses I'd tended for decades. The magnolia tree stood majestic in the corner of the yard, its white blossoms just beginning to open. Robert would have loved this time of year. I'll see you tomorrow, I called over my shoulder, not waiting for a response as I walked to my car. I had preparations to make and a phone call to return. Jessica Morales, a real estate developer who'd been trying to buy the entire block for years, had left 3 messages since hearing I'd sold my house. I hadn't been interested in her offers before.
But now?
Now I was very interested in what Jessica had to say. The senior living apartment felt like a hotel room, impersonal, generic, and distinctly not mine. Even the furniture, hastily purchased by Caroline and Derek to help me settle in, was various shades of tan and cream.
Safe.
Neutral. Forgettable. I set my box of personal belongings on the kitchen counter and looked around the space. At 800 square feet, it wasn't tiny, but compared to my 3-bedroom Craftsman with its sprawling garden, it felt like a shoebox. The kitchen opened directly into the living room, which held a small dining table, a sofa, and a TV mounted on the wall. Down a short hallway was the bedroom and a bathroom with safety bars already installed by the toilet and shower. For my safety, Derek had explained, because apparently at 65, I was suddenly incapable of bathing without government-approved grab bars. I unpacked the box methodically, placing my favorite coffee mug on the counter, arranging my gardening books on the empty shelves, setting framed photos on the side table. Robert's face smiled at me from our wedding day, from Caroline's high school graduation, from our 25th anniversary cruise. I touched his image gently. You wouldn't believe what they've done, Robert, I whispered. You wouldn't believe what our daughter has become. The movers arrived shortly after, filling the small apartment with boxes and furniture that suddenly seemed too large, too numerous. My beloved reading chair barely fit in the corner of the living room. My writing desk looked absurd against the short wall by the window. Even my clothes overwhelmed the modest closet, forcing me to store off-season items in containers under the bed. By evening, the movers had gone, and I sat alone in the unfamiliar space, surrounded by familiar things that no longer seemed to belong to me. The silence was different here. No creaking floorboards, no tapping of tree branches against the roof, no distant sounds of neighborhood children playing. Just the occasional thump from the apartment above and the mechanical hum of the building's HVAC system. I hadn't realized how profoundly lonely I could feel in a building full of people. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Jessica Morales's name flashed on the screen. "Mrs. Bob," she greeted warmly when I answered. "Thank you for returning my call. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I replied, straightening in my chair. "And please call me Michaela." "Michaela," she repeated. "I was surprised to hear you sold your house. I thought you were determined to stay in the neighborhood." "Circumstances change," I said simply. "They certainly do." There was a knowing quality to her voice that suggested she understood more than I'd said. I imagine it must have been difficult to leave after so many years. "It was not my choice," I admitted, surprising myself with my candor. A brief pause. "I see." Another pause. "Michaela, I hope you don't mind my frankness, but I've been trying to acquire properties on Magnolia Street for my company's new development project. Your house was one of the few holdouts. And now it belongs to my daughter and son-in-law." "Yes, I'm aware. They've already declined my initial offer." Jessica's tone remained professional, but I detected a note of frustration. Derek was quite firm about their plans for the property. I wasn't surprised. Derek had always been drawn to status, the right address, the right car, the right connections. Selling to a developer wouldn't fit his vision, regardless of the profit potential. "What kind of development are you planning?" I asked, curiosity piqued. "A mixed-use community. Retail and restaurants on the ground floor, apartments above, green spaces throughout. We're emphasizing sustainability and accessibility. The renderings are quite beautiful." She paused. "I'd be happy to show them to you." I considered this. "And how many properties on the block have you secured?" 7 out of the 12. Your former home would make 8. With 8, we'd have enough to begin phase 1 of construction. I leaned back in my chair, an idea forming. "Jessica, would you be free to meet tomorrow? Perhaps for coffee?" "Absolutely," she replied, sounding pleased. "There's a cafe near your new residence, I believe?" "Daisy's on Main." The fact that she knew where I now lived didn't surprise me. Real estate developers made it their business to know such things. Daisy's would be perfect. Shall we say 10 o'clock? I'll be there with the renderings and our latest offer package. After we disconnected, I sat in the quiet apartment, contemplating what I'd just set in motion. It wasn't just about revenge, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction I'd feel seeing Derek's face when he realized his plans for my house, my home, were in jeopardy. It was about justice. About consequences for treating me as if I were disposable once I became inconvenient. I walked to the window and looked out at the unfamiliar view. A parking lot, another apartment building, a small patch of carefully maintained landscaping that passed for a garden in this context. Nothing like the mature trees and flowering shrubs I'd nurtured for decades. Tomorrow would be interesting. First coffee with Jessica, then Derek and Caroline's housewarming party. A day of new beginnings, though not the kind my daughter and son-in-law were expecting. I smiled for the first time since leaving my home. Robert would have approved. He never did tolerate disrespect, especially not toward family. Daisy's on Main was exactly the sort of place Derek would describe as quaint with a slightly condescending tone, mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, baristas with colorful hair and multiple piercings. I found it charming and authentic, unlike the sterile chain cafes Derek preferred. I arrived early, selecting a table by the window where I could watch for Jessica. The coffee was excellent, rich and fragrant, served in a large ceramic mug decorated with hand-painted flowers. Nothing like the insipid brew from the senior center's communal pot I'd sampled earlier that morning. At precisely 10 o'clock, Jessica Morales entered the cafe. I recognized her immediately from her company's advertisements, a tall woman in her 40s with sleek dark hair and the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention. She spotted me and approached with an outstretched hand. "Michaela?" "Jessica Morales. Thank you for meeting with me." We shook hands, her grip firm but not aggressive. She was dressed in a tailored pantsuit that managed to look both professional and comfortable, accessorized with a statement necklace that hinted at artistic sensibilities beneath the businesswoman exterior. "Would you like some coffee before we dive in?" I offered, gesturing to the counter. "Absolutely. Their lavender latte is my secret weakness." She smiled, setting down a sleek portfolio case. "Can I get you a refill?"
Please.
"House blend, black." As Jessica ordered our drinks, I considered what I was about to do. Was it petty to interfere with Derek and Caroline's plans for my former home? Perhaps. But they had interfered with my life without hesitation, treating me as an obstacle rather than a person with feelings and agency. They deserved whatever came next. "Here we are," Jessica said, returning with our drinks and a plate of scones. "The blueberry is fantastic if you're inclined." I selected a scone, appreciating her thoughtfulness. "Thank you. Now tell me about this development of yours." Jessica opened her portfolio, revealing architectural renderings of a modern but tasteful development. The buildings maintained some of the neighborhood's craftsman aesthetic while incorporating contemporary elements. Green spaces were abundant, with mature trees preserved and integrated into the design. "We're calling it Magnolia Commons," she explained, sliding a site plan toward me. "The concept is to create a walkable community hub while respecting the neighborhood's historic character." I studied the plans with genuine interest. "What happens to the existing houses?" "Most will be carefully deconstructed, with historical elements preserved where possible. A few of the most significant structures might be relocated." She hesitated. "Your home, your former home, has features we'd particularly like to preserve. The original woodwork, the stained glass in the entryway." "The magnolia tree," I added softly. Jessica nodded. "Especially the magnolia. It's magnificent, and our lead architect has designed a small park area around it." That touched me unexpectedly. Robert's tree, preserved and shared rather than potentially cut down in one of Derek's modernization efforts. "And the timeline for this project?" I asked, regaining my composure. Phase 1 could begin within 6 months of securing the properties. Construction would take approximately 18 months. Which means Derek and Caroline's grand plans for my house. I let the thought hang unfinished. Jessica seemed to understand the subtext. "Would be short-lived, yes. We're prepared to make a very generous offer, significantly above market value, to compensate for the inconvenience." "How generous?" She wrote a figure on a notepad and slid it across the table. My eyebrows raised involuntarily. The number was indeed impressive, nearly double what Derek had paid me. "That's for your former property specifically," Jessica clarified. "We recognize its strategic importance to the project." I took a sip of coffee, processing this information. "And you've already approached Derek with an offer?" "A preliminary one, yes. He rejected it outright, rather rudely in fact. Said something about how cookie-cutter developments would ruin the neighborhood's character." She smiled wryly. "Ironic, considering his renovation plans involve removing most of the home's original character." That sounded like Derek, simultaneously status-conscious and short-sighted. He wouldn't see the potential value in Jessica's offer because it didn't align with his vision of himself as the owner of a prestigious address. What if, I said slowly, I could help persuade him? Jessica tilted her head, intrigued. I'm listening. Derek and Caroline are hosting a housewarming party this afternoon. His parents, the ones who've moved into my home, will be there along with friends and neighbors. I leaned forward slightly. What if you attended as my guest? Her eyes widened in understanding, then narrowed in appreciation of the strategy. A direct approach. I like it. But wouldn't that create tension for you with your family? I laughed, though there was little humor in it. The time for concern about familial tension passed when they decided my home of 30 years was disposable. Besides, they need to understand that actions have consequences. Jessica studied me for a moment, reassessing. I suspected she was used to dealing with sentimental elderly people who could be easily manipulated or dismissed. I was proving to be neither. All right, she said finally. I'll accompany you. What time should I pick you up? 3:30. Wear something impressive but not ostentatious. I want you to look successful but not intimidating. At least not initially. She laughed, a genuine sound of delight. Michaela Bob, you're not at all what I expected. I get that a lot, I replied, smiling. One more thing. Bring updated renderings and your latest offer. And perhaps business cards for the other neighbors. This could be a productive afternoon for you. Jessica's expression was appreciative as she gathered her materials. You know, in another life, you could have been quite the real estate mogul yourself. In this life, I was a high school English teacher for 40 years. I learned a thing or two about strategy and human nature. I finished my coffee. And about poetic justice. As we parted ways outside the cafe, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The path forward was clear now. Derek and Caroline had assumed I would quietly accept their decisions about my life. They had underestimated me badly. By this evening, they would understand their mistake. Back at the apartment, I surveyed my clothing options with a critical eye. The occasion called for something dignified but confident, an outfit that said I was thriving, not diminished by my change in circumstances. I selected a tailored navy dress I'd purchased for Caroline's law school graduation but had never worn, as she decided at the last minute that only Derek's parents would attend the ceremony. The dress still bore its tags, a small reminder of another disappointment I'd quietly absorbed. Today, it would finally serve its purpose. As I laid out the dress, my phone chimed with a text message from Caroline. Mom, about today. Derek's parents are feeling a bit overwhelmed with the move. Maybe better if you come another time? Rain check. The transparent attempt to uninvite me brought a surge of anger I didn't bother to suppress. This was exactly why I needed to attend, to remind them all that I couldn't be dismissed so easily. I typed a reply. Already arranged transportation. Looking forward to meeting everyone. See you at 4. Then, as an afterthought, bringing a friend. Caroline's response was immediate. A friend? Who? I smiled at the phone. You'll see. Don't worry about an extra plate. We won't stay long. 3 disappeared, then reappeared as Caroline struggled with how to respond. Finally, okay, see you then. Setting the phone aside, I continued my preparations. I styled my silver-streaked hair, which I'd worn short and practical for years, but now arranged with more attention than usual. Applied makeup thoughtfully, enough to enhance, not enough to suggest I was trying too hard. Selected jewelry with similar care. My grandmother's pearls, small diamond studs Robert had given me on our 20th anniversary, my wedding band. From a drawer, I retrieved a small velvet pouch and emptied its contents into my palm. A delicate gold bracelet with a single charm. A miniature craftsman house, custom-made by a local jeweler to commemorate our 25th year in our home. Robert's gift to me shortly before his cancer diagnosis. I fastened it around my wrist, drawing strength from its familiar weight. At 3 o'clock, I took a final look at myself in the mirror. The woman who gazed back appeared composed, elegant, and unmistakably resolute. Not the fragile senior citizen Derek and Caroline had recast me as when it suited their purposes. The intercom buzzed, announcing Jessica's arrival. "I'm early," she apologized when I met her in the lobby. "Professional habit. I can wait if you're not ready." "I'm ready," I assured her, taking in her appearance. She'd followed my advice perfectly, wearing a well-cut pantsuit in a deep burgundy that suggested authority without aggression. Her portfolio was tucked under one arm, expensive but not flashy. Her eyes widened slightly as she assessed me. "Michaela, you look magnificent." "Thank you."
So do you.
I gestured toward the exit. "Shall we?" Jessica's car matched her professional image, a luxury sedan, tasteful rather than showy. As we drove toward my former neighborhood, she briefed me on her latest strategies. "I've prepared individualized offers for each property owner," she explained, taking into account the unique features of each home and situation. "For your daughter and son-in-law, I've included options beyond just the cash offer, potential investment opportunities in the new development, for instance." "Derek fancies himself a savvy investor," I noted. "That might appeal to him, though his pride will be an obstacle." Jessica nodded. "Men like him often have difficulty accepting that someone else's vision might be superior to their own. But money has a way of overcoming pride." "Not always," I cautioned. "Derek values status as much as wealth. Being the owner of a historic home on Magnolia Street matters to him." Then we'll emphasize how his status could be enhanced as an early investor in Magnolia Commons. Pioneer rather than preservationist. I smiled at her adaptability. "You're good at this." "So are you," she countered. "Most people don't analyze their family members so dispassionately. When your family treats you as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected, dispassion becomes a necessary survival skill." Jessica didn't respond immediately, her expression thoughtful as she navigated the familiar streets leading to my former home. As we turned onto Magnolia Street, I felt a tightening in my chest, grief, anger, and determination intertwined. The house looked the same from the outside, though Derek's gleaming SUV in the driveway instead of my modest sedan changed the picture in subtle ways. Several other expensive vehicles lined the street, along with a catering van. Clearly, Derek and Caroline were making an impression with this housewarming. "Ready?" Jessica asked, parking across the street. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. More than ready. As we approached the front walk, I noticed the first changes to the property. My carefully tended hydrangeas had been removed from either side of the porch, replaced by generic boxwoods in decorative containers. The handmade mosaic stepping stones Robert and I had created were gone, substituted with uniform pavers. Small changes but telling ones. The systematic erasure of my presence had already begun. Jessica must have sensed my reaction. "Remember why we're here," she murmured. "Focus on what happens next, not what's already done." I nodded, straightening my shoulders as we reached the front door, my front door for 30 years, and rang the bell. Time to remind my family that some things couldn't be so easily discarded. The door swung open, revealing Caroline in a floral dress I'd never seen, her blonde hair styled in loose waves that had clearly required professional assistance. Her smile froze when she saw me, eyes widening as they shifted to Jessica. "Mom," she said, recovering quickly. "You're here. And you brought—" Her voice trailed off in question. "Jessica Morales," my companion supplied smoothly, extending her hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Caroline. Your mother has told me so much about you." Caroline shook Jessica's hand automatically, confusion evident in her expression. "I'm sorry. How do you?" "Jessica is a new friend," I interjected. She was kind enough to drive me today. May we come in? Of course. Caroline stepped back, her perfect hostess training overriding her obvious discomfort. Everyone's in the living room and garden. We entered the foyer, where the changes were more pronounced. The antique console table that had belonged to Robert's grandmother was gone, replaced by a modern piece in gray and chrome. The walls, once a warm sage green, had been painted an antiseptic white. But the stained glass panel above the door remained, casting jewel-toned light across the hardwood floor, original features likely protected by the home's historic status, which Derek would need to maintain for the tax benefits. Voices and laughter drifted from the living room, where a group of about 20 people mingled with drinks in hand. I recognized some neighbors, a few of Derek's colleagues, and, standing near the fireplace like they owned the place, which, in their minds, they now did, Bill and Sandra Parker. Derek's parents had always treated me with a thin veneer of politeness that barely concealed their conviction that I wasn't quite good enough for their social circle. Bill, a retired investment banker, and Sandra, a former interior designer who now chaired various charity committees, had never warmed to me despite 15 years of family gatherings. Derek spotted us first, his expression shifting from congenial host to wary competitor in an instant. He excused himself from a conversation and strode toward us, champagne flute in hand. "Michaela," he greeted, kissing the air near my cheek. "We weren't sure you'd make it." His gaze slid to Jessica, assessment in his eyes. "And you brought a guest." "Jessica Morales," she introduced herself again, extending her hand with the same professional warmth. "I've been eager to meet you, Derek. I believe we have some mutual interests." Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed swiftly by wariness. "You're the developer. Morales Properties." "That's right. Your mother-in-law and I had a lovely chat this morning." Derek's gaze snapped to me, his expression hardening. "Did you now? How unexpected." "Life is full of surprises," I replied pleasantly, much like finding myself suddenly relocated to Cedar Creek Senior Living. A flush crept up Derek's neck. Before he could respond, Bill and Sandra approached, curiosity evidently overcoming their usual restraint. "Michaela," Sandra greeted, air kissing near my cheeks. "How lovely to see you. Are you settling into your new place?" "It's an adjustment," I answered truthfully. "Though I've found compensations, like meeting new people." I gestured to Jessica. "Sandra and Bill Parker, this is Jessica Morales of Morales Properties. Jessica, my former in-laws." I emphasized former subtly, watching Sandra's expression tighten fractionally. She'd always insisted on introducing me as her daughter-in-law's mother, rather than acknowledging any direct relation. "Pleasure," Jessica said, shaking their hands. "I understand you've just moved into this beautiful home yourselves." "Temporarily," Bill clarified, chest puffing slightly. "While our new condo in Palm Springs is being finished. We're helping Derek and Caroline oversee the renovations here." "Renovations?" Jessica inquired innocently. "It seems in wonderful condition already." "Cosmetic updates mainly," Sandra supplied. "The previous owner's taste was a bit dated." My smile remained fixed as I absorbed the casual insult. "How fortunate that you're here to correct my 30 years of misguided decorating choices." A moment of uncomfortable silence followed, broken when Caroline appeared with champagne flutes for Jessica and me. "Here you are," she said brightly, clearly attempting to defuse the tension. "We're just about to toast the new beginning." "Perfect timing," Jessica commented, accepting the champagne. "New beginnings are exactly what I wanted to discuss with all of you." Derek's eyes narrowed. "This is hardly the venue for business discussions, Ms. Morales." "On the contrary," Jessica countered smoothly. "I've found that social settings often allow for the most productive conversations. Less pressure, more creativity." "Derek," I interjected, "why don't you hear what Jessica has to say?" Her proposal might interest you more than you expect. He hesitated, clearly torn between dismissing us and maintaining his image as a gracious host in front of his gathered friends and colleagues. Perhaps we could step into the study for a few minutes, Caroline suggested, glancing nervously between us and the other guests. The study? I echoed. You mean Robert's office? It's been converted, Derek said flatly. Home office and guest room now. Another piece of my history, of Robert's presence, erased. I forced myself to nod. Lead the way. As our small group moved toward the back of the house, I noticed several neighbors watching with interest, particularly Tom and Linda Abernathy from next door, who had always been friendly with me. Linda caught my eye and raised an eyebrow in question. I gave her a slight nod, suggesting we'd talk later. The room that had been Robert's office, with his roll-top desk, walls of books, and the worn leather chair where he'd read to Caroline as a child, was now a sterile workspace. A glass-topped desk held Derek's laptop, while a sleek sofa bed occupied the opposite wall. Robert's architectural drawings and family photos had been replaced by generic landscapes and a large mirror that made the space appear bigger. Derek closed the door behind us, his demeanor shifting from host to businessman. All right, Ms. Morales. What exactly is your game here? And, Michaela, I have to say, I'm surprised to see you involving yourself in real estate matters. Why? I asked simply. Because I'm just a retired teacher? Or because I'm a senior citizen who should know her place? That's not what I meant, Derek backpedaled, though his tone suggested otherwise. I believe Michaela has every right to be concerned about what happens to the neighborhood she's called home for decades, Jessica intervened smoothly. She set her portfolio on the desk and extracted several glossy documents. And as it happens, her insights have been invaluable to refining our vision for Magnolia Commons. We've already told you we're not interested in selling, Derek stated flatly. Especially not to turn this historic neighborhood into some soulless, mixed-use development. Jessica spread out architectural renderings across the desk. I don't think soulless is quite accurate. Take a look. Despite themselves, Derek, Caroline, and the elder Parkers leaned in to examine the plans. The renderings were indeed beautiful, showing tree-lined pedestrian zones, artisanal shops, and residences that complemented the neighborhood's existing aesthetic while modernizing it thoughtfully. This is actually quite nice, Caroline admitted, earning a sharp look from Derek. It's irrelevant how nice it is, he snapped. We have plans for this property. Plans that would be significantly less profitable than our offer, Jessica noted, sliding a document toward him. We've increased our initial proposal substantially. Derek glanced at the figure and paused, clearly caught off guard by the amount. Even Bill leaned forward with newfound interest. That's considerable, Derek acknowledged reluctantly. There's more, Jessica continued. We're offering early investors preferred options in commercial spaces within the development. Many of our retail partners are prestigious brands looking for precisely the demographic this area will attract. I watched Derek's expression shift as he processed this information. Status and profit, his two primary motivations, were being directly addressed. Why the sudden increase in offer? Bill asked shrewdly. What's changed since your initial approach? Jessica smiled. Timing and strategy. We've secured enough properties to begin Phase 1, but adding this block would accelerate our timeline significantly. The premium reflects that value. We would need time to consider this, Derek hedged, though I could see the calculations already happening behind his eyes. Of course, Jessica agreed. Though I should mention we're approaching all homeowners on the block simultaneously. The Abernathysts next door seemed quite receptive when we spoke last week. This was news to me, but I kept my expression neutral as Derek and Caroline exchanged concerned glances. The possibility of being surrounded by construction while their neighbors cashed in clearly hadn't occurred to them. The Abernathysts are considering selling? Caroline asked, her voice higher than normal. But they've been here almost as long as... She stopped herself before saying, as Mom, but I heard it anyway. 27 years, I supplied helpfully. Though not quite my 30. Linda mentioned they've been thinking about moving closer to their grandchildren in Seattle. Jessica nodded. They found our proposal quite attractive, particularly the option to maintain an ownership stake in the development while still relocating. And how many other properties have you secured? Bill asked, his banker's mind clearly running numbers. 7 out of the 12 on this block, Jessica answered. Your home would make 8. With 8, we can begin phase 1. I watched as the reality sank in. Even if Derek and Caroline refused to sell, they would soon be living in the middle of a construction zone as the neighborhood transformed around them. Their prestigious address would become less desirable, and the property value would likely decrease temporarily during development, though it would eventually rise once Magnolia Commons was completed. But that would require patience and foresight, neither of which Derek possessed in abundance. Think of it this way, Jessica continued, sensing their wavering resolve. You could either be participants in the neighborhood's evolution with preferential investment options and a significant profit, or you can remain on the sidelines while it happens around you. The plans do look impressive, Caroline admitted, studying the renderings more closely. And the profit margin would allow us to consider properties in Lakeside Hills. She glanced at Derek, who was still frowning at the documents. Lakeside Hills was the exclusive gated community he'd been eyeing for years. We'd need assurances about the timeline and the quality of the development, Derek said, not yet willing to concede but clearly tempted, and guarantees about our investment options. All outlined in the full proposal, Jessica assured him, extracting another document from her portfolio, including priority selection of commercial spaces for any businesses you might want to establish. Derek's eyebrows raised at this. He'd been talking about opening his own investment firm for years, but had never taken the leap. This could be the opportunity he'd been waiting for, a prestigious address for his business, without the overhead of purchasing commercial property outright. Bill cleared his throat. Maybe we should discuss this as a family before making any decisions. Of course, Jessica agreed smoothly. I wouldn't expect an answer today, but I should mention that our premium offer is time-sensitive. We're hoping to finalize property acquisitions within the next 2 weeks to stay on schedule. 2 weeks. Derek looked startled. That's not much time for due diligence. I'm happy to provide all the documentation you need, Jessica replied. Environmental studies, financial projections, architectural plans. Everything is in order. I caught Caroline's eye and saw something unexpected there, a flicker of shame or regret. For a moment, she looked like my daughter again, not Derek's wife. She glanced around the room at the stripped-down version of what had once been her father's sanctuary, and I wondered if she was finally seeing the situation through my eyes. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. One of the catering staff poked her head in. "Excuse me, Mr. Parker, but the food is ready to be served." "We'll be right out," Derek said, straightening his shoulders as if physically shaking off the business discussion to resume his role as host. "Ms. Morales, we appreciate the presentation, but as you can see, we have guests." Of course, Jessica collected her materials, leaving only her business card and a slim folder on the desk. "All the essential information is in there. Feel free to call me with any questions." We followed Derek and Caroline back to the main gathering, where guests had begun to fill plates from an elaborate buffet set up in the dining room. The energy in the house had shifted during our absence, more animated, as alcohol loosened tongues and inhibitions. Sandra appeared at my elbow as Jessica moved away to speak with the Abernathy's. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Michaela," she hissed under her breath, "but involving yourself in business matters you don't understand is inappropriate." I turned to her with a placid smile. "Is it? I thought I was simply introducing a business opportunity to my family. After all, isn't that what Derek did for me when he suggested selling my home and moving to Cedar Creek? Her eyes narrowed. That was different. That was for your own good. Was it? I maintained my pleasant expression. How fortunate I am to have so many people making decisions about what's good for me without bothering to ask my opinion. Before she could respond, I excused myself and moved toward the French doors leading to the garden. I needed air, needed to escape the suffocating feeling of being a stranger in what had once been my sanctuary. The garden, at least, was largely unchanged. The flower beds I'd cultivated for decades were in full spring bloom, irises, peonies, and early roses creating a tapestry of color. The stone pathway wound through the plantings just as it always had, leading to the magnificent magnolia tree in the far corner. I made my way there, nodding politely to guests but avoiding conversation. The magnolia's white blossoms were just beginning to open, their sweet fragrance filling the air. Beneath its spreading branches lay the small stone marker, unobtrusive but unmistakable to those who knew, where Robert's ashes had been scattered. Your father would be livid, I said softly, knowing Caroline had followed me. I didn't turn around, keeping my eyes on the tree Robert had planted with such hope 3 decades ago.
Mom.
Her voice was uncertain, lacking the confident edge she'd adopted since marrying Derek. Do you remember helping him plant this? Asked, still not looking at her. You were 5. You wore your yellow rain boots even though it wasn't raining, and you insisted on putting the first shovelful of dirt around the roots. A pause. I remember, she said quietly. Dad said it would grow along with me. And it did. Just like his love for you. I finally turned to face my daughter. What happened to you, Caroline? When did money and status become more important than family, than memory? Her composure cracked slightly, a glimpse of the girl she'd been visible beneath the polished woman she'd become. It's not like that. We thought we were helping you. The stairs, the yard work, the maintenance, it's a lot for someone your age. I managed perfectly well, I replied evenly. But more importantly, no one bothered to ask what I wanted. You and Derek decided what was best for me, just like you're deciding what parts of this house, of your history, deserve to be preserved and what should be erased.
She flinched at that.
We're not erasing anything. Aren't you? Your father's office is gone. The furniture we chose together is gone. Even the color of the walls, every choice we made as a family, is being systematically removed. Caroline looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Derek thinks, he says the house has more potential with a cleaner aesthetic. Derek thinks a lot of things, I observed. Most of them seem to involve erasing the past to make room for his vision of the future. But history isn't so easily discarded, Caroline. It has a way of making itself known. Around us, guests continued to enjoy the garden, oblivious to our tense conversation. Jessica was deep in discussion with the Abernathy's and another neighbor, business cards being exchanged with evident interest. Caroline followed my gaze. You planned this, didn't you? Bringing her here, showing the development plans to everyone. I created an opportunity, I corrected. Just as you and Derek created one when you decided my home would serve your purposes better than it served mine. Actions have consequences, Caroline. That's something I always tried to teach you. Mom, Mrs. Bob. Jessica approached, her expression professionally neutral though her eyes conveyed triumph. I hate to interrupt, but I should be going. I have another appointment. Of course, I said, grateful for the timely exit opportunity. I'll join you. Caroline, thank you for having us. Please give Derek my regards. Caroline stood frozen, clearly torn between the public face she needed to maintain as hostess and the private reckoning she was experiencing as a daughter. You're leaving? But you just got here. We accomplished what we came to do, I said simply. Which was what, exactly? She asked, a hint of her father's directness in her tone. I smiled, genuinely this time. To remind you that I'm still here, Caroline. That I may be 65, but I'm not powerless or voiceless. That treating me as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a person to be respected has consequences. Her face paled slightly as the message sank in. For perhaps the first time, she was seeing me not as an aging parent to be managed, but as a woman with agency and purpose. The neighbors seem quite interested in our proposal, Jessica noted casually. I've scheduled follow-up meetings with the Abernethys and the Wilsons for tomorrow. If your husband would like to join that discussion, he's welcome to call me. Caroline nodded automatically, social training taking over where emotional responses failed her. I'll let him know. We made our way back through the house, saying brief goodbyes to Derek, who was deep in conversation with a group of his colleagues. His expression when he saw Jessica distributing business cards to interested neighbors was a mixture of alarm and calculation. Already, I could see, he was adjusting his strategy. Very productive afternoon, Jessica commented as we walked to her car. Thank you for the introductions. Thank you for being my accomplice, I replied, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. My pleasure. And I wasn't exaggerating about the interest from your neighbors. I think we'll have commitments from at least 3 more properties by the end of the week. And Derek and Caroline? Jessica smiled knowingly. They'll hold out just long enough to convince themselves it was their idea all along. Then they'll negotiate aggressively, demanding special considerations to salvage their pride. But they'll sell. You sound very confident. I've dealt with many Derek Parkers in my career. They're predictable in their unpredictability. She opened the car door for me. Besides, with the rest of the neighborhood transforming around them, holding on to that house would be financially irrational. And if there's one thing Derek won't abide, it's missing out on a profit opportunity. As we drove away from Magnolia Street, I looked back at the house one last time. It no longer felt like mine. That connection had been severed, painfully, but perhaps necessarily. The future of the property was uncertain, caught between Derek's renovation plans and Jessica's development vision. But my own future suddenly seemed clearer. Whatever happened to the house, I had reclaimed something more important: my voice, my agency, my self-respect. I had shown Caroline and Derek that I wouldn't be silenced or sidelined, that my age didn't define my capability or diminish my worth. The revenge had been sweet, yes. But the real victory was in what came next. Jessica dropped me off at my apartment with a promise to keep me updated on any developments. As I unlocked the door to my beige box of a home, the contrast between the sterile space and the vibrant garden I'd just left struck me anew. But the emptiness felt different now, less like a prison sentence and more like a blank canvas. I kicked off my shoes and made myself a cup of tea, mulling over the events of the afternoon. Derek's shocked expression when he realized Jessica was the developer he'd dismissed so rudely. Caroline's flicker of shame when confronted with the evidence of how thoroughly they were erasing my presence from the house. Sandra's thinly veiled hostility when she realized I wasn't as helpless as they'd assumed. My phone pinged with a text message from an unfamiliar number. Michaela, it's Linda Abernathy. Got your number from the neighborhood directory. That was quite a show today. Tom and I are meeting with Jessica tomorrow. Would love to catch up with you beforehand. Coffee at 9. I smiled, typing a quick response. Daisy's on Main at 9. Looking forward to it. Another ping, this time from Caroline. I steeled myself before reading it. Mom, we need to talk. What you did today was inappropriate. Derek is furious. Call me. No apology. No acknowledgement of how inappropriate their treatment of me had been. Just concern about Derek's feelings and judgment about my behavior. Some things hadn't changed. I didn't respond. Let her wonder, for once, what I was thinking. Let her experience the uncertainty I'd felt when decisions about my life were made without my input. Instead, I unpacked the last of my boxes, Books that hadn't fit on the apartment's modest shelves, photo albums I hadn't had the heart to look through until now. As I arranged them, I began to see possibilities in this new space. The wall opposite the sofa would be perfect for a gallery of family photos. The small patio outside my bedroom could accommodate container gardening. Not the extensive beds I'd cultivated for decades, but enough to keep my hands in the soil. I found myself thinking of the community garden Jessica had mentioned during our meeting. Perhaps I could secure a plot there, create a new growing space to nurture. The thought was both painful and promising, letting go of Robert's magnolia tree but planting new seeds for this chapter of my life. The phone rang again around 7. Caroline, according to the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, not quite ready for that conversation. I needed to hold on to the feeling of empowerment a little longer before engaging with her demands and Derek's anger. Instead, I called Tom and Linda Abernathy, putting the phone on speaker as I continued unpacking. Michaela, Linda's warm voice filled the room. Tom's here too. We've been talking about nothing but your grand entrance today since you left. It wasn't planned as a grand entrance, I clarified, though I couldn't help smiling at her description. Jessica and I had a productive meeting this morning, and the timing with the housewarming just worked out. Oh, sure it did, Tom chuckled. Just like it worked out that every neighbor on the block got to see Derek's face when he realized what was happening. Linda said he looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. He did look rather shocked, I admitted, allowing myself a small laugh. As did his parents. Sandra in particular seemed appalled that I wasn't fading quietly into elderly obscurity. Good for you, Linda said firmly. We were horrified when we heard how they pushed you out. Caroline spinning some story about how you were struggling with the house maintenance and they were helping you transition to senior living. Tom nearly called Derek out on it, but I convinced him we didn't know the whole story. Her loyalty warmed me. The Abernathy's had been good neighbors for decades, always ready with a helping hand or a cup of sugar, but I hadn't realized how protective they felt toward me. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. The truth is I was managing fine. The house was paid off, and my pension covered the expenses comfortably. This was entirely Derek's idea, though Caroline went along with it. The boy always did have ideas above his station, Tom grumbled, looking down his nose at the neighborhood, while living in a house he didn't earn. Tom, Linda chided gently, though I could tell she agreed. So, Michaela, what's this development plan really about? Is it legitimate, or was it just to give Derek a taste of his own medicine? It's entirely legitimate, I assured them. I vetted Jessica thoroughly before agreeing to her proposal. The development she's planning would actually preserve much of the neighborhood's character, while making it more accessible and sustainable. We're intrigued, Linda admitted. The money's good, better than good, actually, and we've been thinking about moving closer to the grandkids anyway. But we wanted to check with you first. It feels a bit like betraying you if we sell to the developer. Her consideration touched me deeply. Linda, you and Tom should do what's best for your family. I have no claim on your decisions. If Jessica's offer works for you, you have my full support. What about you? Tom asked bluntly. What happens to you in all this? I hadn't expected the question, and it took me a moment to formulate an answer.
I'm recalibrating.
The apartment isn't what I would have chosen, but I'm determined to make it work for now. Long term, I'm not sure yet. But today reminded me that I still have choices, still have a voice. That's worth a great deal. You always have a place with us, Linda said firmly. If you ever need somewhere to stay, or just want a change of scenery, our door is open. The conversation continued for another half hour, catching up on neighborhood gossip and discussing the possibilities the development might bring. By the time we said goodbye, I felt more connected to my old life than I had since the move, despite the physical distance. I was about to prepare a light dinner when another text arrived from Caroline. Mom, seriously.
Call me.
Derek's talking about legal action if this development thing moves forward. Legal action? Against whom? The very idea was absurd. I still owned shares in the house, a detail I had insisted on when Derek presented the initial sales contract, though he dismissed it as unnecessary sentimentality. The provision gave me no control over the property, but entitled me to a percentage of profits from any future sale or development. Derek had agreed, assuming the clause would never matter. Now, perhaps he was regretting that concession. I considered calling Caroline back, then decided against it. Let them stew overnight. Sometimes silence was the most powerful response. Instead, I finally tackled the task I'd been avoiding since the move, sorting through Robert's remaining possessions. A small box of his things had made the journey with me, items too personal to leave behind but too painful to display immediately in this new space. His pocket watch, still keeping perfect time after 30 years. The fountain pen he used to grade papers during his years as a university professor. The dog-eared copy of The Great Gatsby we'd read aloud to each other on our honeymoon, margins filled with our youthful insights and private jokes. As I held each object, memories surfaced, not with the sharp pain I'd feared, but with a bittersweet warmth. Robert would have hated what Derek and Caroline had done, would have raged against their presumption. But he also would have admired how I'd handled it today. My steel magnolia, he used to call me when I stood firm in difficult situations. I arranged his items carefully on the small bookshelf, no longer hiding them away, but incorporating them into my new life. They belonged with me, not in that house, not anymore. The house had been important, yes, but it was just a structure. The memories, the love, the strength I'd gained through decades of partnership, those were mine to keep regardless of address. I slept soundly that night, more peacefully than I had since the move. Whatever happened next with Jessica's development or Derek's threatened legal action, I had reclaimed something essential, my sense of self, independent of others' expectations or plans for me. Morning brought a flurry of text messages and voicemails, 2 more from Caroline, increasingly agitated, 1 from Derek, terse and businesslike, demanding I call him immediately about this development situation, and surprisingly, 1 from Bill Parker. Michaela, Bill here. Wanted to apologize for Sandra's behavior yesterday. Not how we intended your visit to go. Regarding the Morales proposal, I've convinced Derek to take a meeting. Would appreciate your insights before that happens. Call me. Interesting. Bill had always been the more reasonable of Derek's parents, though that wasn't saying much. His financial background meant he could recognize a solid opportunity when he saw one, regardless of personal feelings. I dressed casually for my coffee with Linda, opting for comfort over the statement attire I'd worn yesterday. This wasn't about impressing anyone or making a point. It was simply about reconnecting with a friend who had shown loyalty when it mattered. Linda was already waiting when I arrived at Daisy's, 2 steaming mugs on the table in front of her. She rose to embrace me warmly. I ordered your usual, house blend, black, right? Perfect. I settled into the chair across from her, noting she'd selected a quiet corner table where we could speak privately. How are you and Tom this morning? Excited. Nervous. Uncertain. She smiled ruefully. All the emotions that come with big life decisions. But what about you? Have you heard from Caroline or Derek since yesterday? Multiple messages, which I haven't returned yet. I took a sip of the excellent coffee. I needed time to process before engaging with their drama. Linda nodded understandingly. Smart. Though knowing Derek, he's probably working himself into quite a state. Let him. It might be educational. I set my mug down. Linda, I meant what I said yesterday. You and Tom should make whatever decision feels right for you, without concern for my feelings. I know you mean that. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand briefly. But your opinion matters to us. We've been neighbors for nearly 3 decades. That counts for something. It does, I agreed. And if you want my honest assessment, I think Jessica's development could be good for the neighborhood. The area has been changing anyway. You've seen the teardowns and McMansions going up on Oak Street. At least this plan preserves some of the character and community. Linda sighed. That's our feeling too. And the timing works for us. Tom's arthritis is getting worse, and that two-story just isn't practical long-term. With what Morales is offering, we could buy a lovely single-level home in Seattle and still have money left for travel. Then you should do it, I said firmly. Life is too short to postpone joy out of misplaced loyalty or fear of change.
She studied me for a moment.
You've changed since yesterday. There's a lightness to you that wasn't there before. Revenge is energizing, I joked, then grew serious. But you're right. Something shifted yesterday. Seeing Derek's face when he realized I wasn't as powerless as he thought, it reminded me that I still have agency, still have value beyond what my family assigns me. You've always had value, Michaela. Some people just need reminding of that fact. She glanced at her watch. We should probably head out if we're going to make that meeting with Jessica.
We.
I raised an eyebrow. Of course we. Jessica specifically asked if you'd be joining us. Said your perspective would be helpful in addressing the Wilsons' concerns about the development. Linda smiled knowingly. I think she sees potential in you beyond this one deal. The idea was intriguing. I'd spent my career nurturing young minds as a teacher, finding satisfaction in helping others develop their potential. The thought of applying those skills in a new context, of having genuine input in how my beloved neighborhood evolved, held unexpected appeal. In that case, I said, gathering my purse, we shouldn't keep her waiting. 6 months later, I stood at the edge of the construction site that had once been Magnolia Street, watching as workers laid the foundation for what would become Magnolia Commons. The summer heat had given way to crisp autumn air, leaves turning gold and crimson on the trees that had been carefully preserved in the development plan. Jessica approached, hard hat in hand, looking every bit the successful developer in tailored slacks and a structured blazer. Ready for the tour, Michaela? I nodded, accepting the hard hat she offered. Lead the way. We walked the perimeter of the site, Jessica pointing out where each element of the development would be situated. The mixed-use buildings along the main street, the pedestrian walkways, the green spaces, and most importantly to me, the Central Park area built around the magnolia tree that had once stood in my backyard. The landscape architects are working with the arborists to ensure minimal stress on the tree during construction, Jessica explained as we approached the temporary fencing protecting the magnificent specimen. They've implemented a specialized root protection zone and modified the surrounding hardscape design to accommodate its eventual growth. Robert would be pleased, I said quietly, remembering how carefully he'd selected and planted that tree 3 decades ago. He always said it would outlive us all. And now it will continue to do so in a public space where everyone can enjoy it. Jessica smiled. The dedication plaque is being fabricated now. The Robert Bob Memorial Garden has a nice ring to it, don't you think? The gesture caught me by surprise. We discussed the possibility of preserving the tree, but the named dedication was new information. Jessica, thank you. It was the board's unanimous decision after your presentation last month. Your vision for integrating the neighborhood's history with its future resonated strongly. She checked her tablet. Speaking of which, the historical documentation team would like your input on the neighborhood narrative we're developing for the visitor center. After that first meeting with the Abernethys and Wilsons, Jessica had invited me to consult on various aspects of the development, from architectural details that honored the area's craftsman heritage to community programming for the public spaces. What began as occasional input had evolved into a part-time position as community liaison, a role created specifically to leverage my knowledge of the neighborhood and its residents. Derek had been furious when he discovered my involvement, initially threatening legal action as promised. But as Jessica had predicted, his anger eventually gave way to calculation. When he realized the development was proceeding with or without his participation, he negotiated aggressively for special considerations, premium positioning for his planned investment firm in the commercial space, expanded profit sharing in the overall project, and, of course, status as a founding investor, with all the social capital that entailed. Sandra and Bill had retreated to Palm Springs earlier than planned, their temporary residence in my former home cut short when construction began on neighboring properties. They'd pretended outrage at the destruction of a historic neighborhood, but privately, according to Caroline, they were pleased with the investment potential Derek had secured. Caroline had been another story entirely. The day after the housewarming, she'd appeared at my apartment unannounced, alternating between anger at my betrayal and tearful remorse for her role in displacing me. "I never meant to hurt you, Mom," she'd insisted, pacing my small living room. "I really thought we were helping. The stairs, the yard work, it seemed like too much for you to manage alone. Did you ever ask me if I needed help?
Hindi kuntat.
Or did you and Derek simply decide what was best for me without bothering to include me in the conversation?" Her silence had been answer enough. That's what hurt, Caroline. Not losing the house, though that was painful. It was being treated as an inconvenience rather than a person with agency and feelings. We talked for hours that day, really talked, in a way we hadn't since before Robert's death. By the time she left, something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness, exactly, that would take time, but understanding. A recognition that our relationship needed to be rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect, not obligation or assumption. In the months since, we'd established a cautious new dynamic. Weekly dinners, just the two of us, without Derek's influence. Honest conversations about expectations and boundaries. Small steps toward healing the breach that had developed so gradually we'd both failed to notice, until it was almost too late. Earth to Michaela. Jessica's voice pulled me back to the present. "Lost you for a minute there." "Just reflecting." I smiled apologetically. "It's been quite a journey, these past few months." Jessica nodded understandingly. From unwanted relocation to community visionary. Not bad for someone Derek described as just a retired teacher who should be enjoying her golden years in peace. I laughed at her accurate impression of Derek's condescending tone. He's still adjusting to the new reality. His latest complaint is that I'm working too much and should be focused on relaxing at my age, while he works 60-hour weeks and considers it a badge of honor. Jessica shook her head. The double standard is almost comical. We continued our tour, discussing minor adjustments to the plans and addressing questions from the construction team. As community liaison, I'd become a familiar and respected presence on the site, my insights valued by architects and workers alike. Later, as we sat in the project trailer reviewing timeline updates, Jessica broached a subject we'd been dancing around for weeks. "The board is very impressed with your contributions to Magnolia Commons. They've authorized me to offer you a more permanent position once construction is completed." "What kind of position?" I asked, intrigued despite my initial reservations about formal employment at my age. "Director of Community Integration," Jessica said, sliding a folder across the table. "Overseeing the transition as residents and businesses move in, managing the public spaces and community programming, ensuring the development fulfills its promise to honor the neighborhood's heritage while embracing its future." I opened the folder, scanning the job description and the surprisingly generous compensation package. "This is substantial." "It reflects the value you bring," Jessica said simply. "Your knowledge of the area, your relationships with longtime residents, your educational background. They're assets we can't find elsewhere. Plus," she added with a grin, "you've proven remarkably adept at navigating difficult personalities." a skill that will be invaluable as we integrate new and existing community members. The opportunity was unexpected but undeniably appealing. After decades in the classroom, I'd assumed my professional life was over. The prospect of a new challenge, a new way to contribute my expertise, was both intimidating and exhilarating. "I'll need time to consider it," I said, closing the folder. Of course. The position won't be active for another 6 months anyway, as we approach completion of Phase 1. Jessica stood, gathering her materials. Just something to think about. We parted ways at my car, Jessica heading back to her office while I prepared for my weekly dinner with Caroline. As I drove to the restaurant we'd chosen, neutral territory, not her home or my apartment, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in half a year. The apartment I'd initially viewed as a prison now felt like a comfortable base. I'd painted the beige walls in colors of my choosing, arranged my furniture to suit my needs rather than fit Derek's idea of appropriate senior living, and established a thriving container garden on my small patio. The community garden plot Jessica had mentioned had materialized as well, where I now grew vegetables and flowers alongside neighbors who had become friends. Most significantly, I'd reclaimed my sense of purpose. The consulting work with Magnolia Commons had reawakened professional skills I'd forgotten I possessed, while introducing me to new challenges that kept my mind engaged and active. The prospect of a formal role in shaping the community's future was unexpected, but increasingly attractive. Caroline was waiting when I arrived at Salvatore's, our favorite Italian restaurant. She stood to embrace me, the gesture more natural now than it had been in those first awkward weeks after our confrontation. "You look wonderful, Mom," she said, studying me as we sat. "There's something different about you today." "Just dust from the construction site," I joked, settling into my chair. "I had a tour of the progress this afternoon." "How's it coming along?" Her question was genuine, a marked change from the resentful tone she'd adopted in the early days of the project. "On schedule. The foundation work is nearly complete, and framing will begin next month." I opened my menu, though I already knew what I would order. Jessica showed me where Dad's tree will be featured in the Central Park area. They're naming it after him. Caroline's eyes widened. "Really? That's wonderful, Mom. Dad would have loved that." "He would have," I agreed, though he might have been embarrassed by the attention. A comfortable silence fell as we perused our menus, broken when the waiter arrived to take our orders. Once he'd departed, Caroline leaned forward slightly. "I have some news," she said, her expression a mixture of hesitation and determination. "I've decided to leave the firm and start my own practice." This was unexpected. Caroline had been with Derek's law firm since passing the bar, her career path as carefully managed as every other aspect of their lives. "That's a big step. What brought this on?" She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "A lot of things. The corporate clients, the billing pressures, the ethical compromises. But mostly..." She hesitated, then met my eyes directly. "Mostly seeing you these past few months. How you've reinvented yourself, found new purpose. It made me realize I've been living Derek's version of my life, not my own." I reached across the table to cover her hand with mine. "That's very brave, Caroline. What kind of practice are you considering?" "Elder law." Her answer came quickly, as if she'd rehearsed it. "Helping seniors navigate housing issues, estate planning, healthcare decisions. Ensuring they have proper advocacy and aren't taken advantage of by family members or institutions." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She flushed slightly. "I know what you're thinking." "Do you?" I kept my tone gentle. "That it's too little too late. That I'm trying to atone for how we treated you." I shook my head. "Actually, I was thinking how proud your father would be. He always said you had a natural sense of justice, even as a child." Remember how you organized that protest in fourth grade when the school tried to cut the music program? She laughed, tension easing from her shoulders, and for a brief moment, peace seemed to have settled upon our hearts. I heaved a contented smile, closed my eyes, and drifted off to sleep. Has someone in your life pushed you aside like Michaela's family did to her? Have you ever had to set a boundary with family that changed everything? Share your story in the comments below. And if you found Michaela's journey from betrayal to triumph inspiring, please like this video, subscribe to her true stories, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another empowering tale of standing up for yourself. Tag someone in the comments who needs to find their inner strength today.